All right, 3, 2, 1. Back for part 2 of the recording here on rebuilding Europe. This is going to take us from Nuremberg trials all the way down to Universal Declaration on Human Rights. So the last 4 parts of these things. Nuremberg trials are the much more famous trials, here, at least here in the United States, as opposed to the ones that took place in Japan, and mostly because they were televised here in the United States. And these are the trials of the Nazi leaders charged with war crimes. And the numbers are pale in comparison to what we saw in Japan. But 10 Nazi leaders are executed. 2 commit suicide while in prison. 3 are put in prison for life. 3 get shorter prison terms. And 3 are actually acquitted or found not guilty. I do want to show this video of the Nuremberg trials. I think it's important. This is real video footage. It does show some of the leaders. It does talk about the uniqueness of the trials. But this YouTube video, I think, is really good in terms of helping us understand exactly what happened in the trials. And again, the 21 Nazi chiefs.
At the Hall of Justice in Nuremberg, history's greatest trial nears its fateful close. Under the most elaborate security precautions, only official cars pass the heavily guarded street barricade. Flags of the victorious Allies, sitting in judgment on the International Military Tribunal, fly over the court building. Supreme Court Justice Jackson, Chief United States Prosecutor, arrives. Credentials of spectators and officials alike are closely scrutinized, for it is amidst a grim and military atmosphere that 21 Nazis are to hear their fate. Sir Hartley Shawcross, British prosecutor, enters as the final rounds of the 10-month trial begin. The prisoners, headed by Goering, who shields his face, arrive under guard.
And again, these are the leaders of many of the concentration camps, Goering being kind of the chief leader of the idea behind the concentration
camps. The trial started with 24 defendants. 1 committed suicide, another was excused for health, and 1 is tried in absentia. There are 21 left in the dock to face civilization's accusation. These, then, are the men whose crimes against humanity brought about a trial without parallel in legal annals. It is doomsday and the day of reckoning as the court rises for one of the closing sessions. The world's finest legal talent has been contributed to the tribunal of 4 nations, which takes its place. Russian, French, and British are the other nations participating. The Nazi hierarchy is there to answer for 10 years of plotting of the Ribbentrop, Keitel, and Kaltenbrunner brand, for the Goering and Hess fanatical cruelties, for the whole program of pillage and murder. Now it is civilization's turn to read their monstrous crimes into the record.
Murder or ill treatment of prisoners of war or persons on the seas. Killing of hostages. Plunder of public or private property. Wanton destruction of cities, towns, or villages. Or devastation not justified by military necessity. C.
And that line there, devastation not justified by military necessity, is the key point to this. Is they did things beyond needed to win a war.
Crimes against humanity, namely murder, extermination, enslavement, deportation, and other inhumane acts committed against any civilian population before or during the war.
For many weary months, a mountain of incredible proof is piled up against these men. Millions of words of evidence have been heard by the judges. Thousands upon thousands of documents have been examined by the finest legal minds of the 4 nations. Defense counsel wait with ill-concealed anxiety for the verdict in a trial conducted with scrupulous fairness for the rights of the defendants. Literally, tons of paper were removed after each long, drawn-out session of court. For 5 savage and bloody years, humanity has waited for this moment of retribution, when the insane ambitions of men like these would come up against the stone wall of world justice. Stryker, Funk, Schacht, and their colleagues. 11 will hang, 6 will be jailed, 3 are acquitted. Sir Geoffrey Lawrence pronounces sentence.
Defendant Hermann Wilhelm Goering, on the counts of the indictment on which you have been convicted, the International Military Tribunal sentences you to death by hanging. Defendant Rudolf Hess.
Goering and Hess are the two main leaders of the concentration camps.
On the counts of the indictment on which you have been convicted, the tribunal sentences you to imprisonment for life. Defendant Joachim von Ribbentrop. On the counts of the indictment on which you have been convicted, the tribunal sentences you to death by hanging. Defendant Julius Stryker. On the count of the indictment on which you have been convicted, the tribunal sentences you to death by hanging.
This is what awaits Goering, Keitel, Rosenberg, and the other apostles of death and hate. The only conceivable end for these merchants of aggression. And as they plunge the world into a bloodbath, it is fitting that they take their final plunge in ignominy.
It's just pretty stunning footage of the trials actually happening, and also how the world felt about those directly afterwards. The next one on our list, or the next 3, or the next one on our list, is the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, otherwise known as GATT. This is in 48, so a few years later. We talked a little bit about this earlier. Unlike World War I, the Americans now took the lead, embracing their new role as citizens of a global superpower. So what this is an agreement in which 23 countries are going to regulate trade between them. It's so important because it's not just an agreement, and 23 nations is a lot to get to sign it, but because it is designed to promote trade and cooperation between the nations by having low tariffs and equal tariffs among all the countries that agree. So countries can't favor one country over another. Low tariffs to promote trade. The thought is that if you trade with countries, you're less likely to fight against them. So just an agreement, again, trying to promote economic stability between countries to also dissuade military rivalries. Next, the United States, as it says there, founded in 45, worked to make a difference throughout the world by doing the following things: trying to move away from colonialism, so one big countries don't rule a lot of smaller countries or smaller areas of the world. Help create the state of Israel as a safe haven for people of the Jewish religion after the Holocaust atrocities. And Israel is still a point of contention today, but as a land in which the Jewish people could safely settle after the atrocities of the Holocaust. Mediate regional conflicts, like if you remember the Balkan conflict kind of started World War I, so try to prevent those from spilling out of control. Aid to needy nations is a lot of what the UN does today, and ultimately does create the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which is the last thing there on our list. Why is it important? Because the U.S. supported and led the United Nations, and this is so different than World War I, where the U.S. never joined the League of Nations, never approved the League of Nations, and the League of Nations proved to be weak and really not work. Unlike that, the U.S. does join the League of Nations, does support the League of Nations, actually leads for the creation of the League of Nations. I meant the United Nations. Therefore, the United Nations is successful in making a difference throughout the world, unlike what happened in the League of Nations. Finally, Universal Declaration of Human Rights. It is written in 1948. Just real quick, we can, this is the document itself, but the preamble pretty much tells exactly what it's going to do. It recognizes the inherent dignity and the equal and inalienable rights of all members of the human family, and is the foundation of freedom and justice and peace in the world. Right? And so it just says, hey, every person should have, and you see it there, freedom of speech and belief, from freedom from fear and want has been proclaimed as the highest aspiration of common people. So this is what people want, and people deserve to have. And it is it's a document unlike anything that the world had ever put together before. 50 different countries, when I say members, that's our countries that were members of the UN, signed this in February of 48. Eleanor Roosevelt, who was the first UN ambassador to the United Nations, was really pushed for this, and even after her husband's death in April of 45, continues her influence around the world by pushing for this. Why, interestingly, the Soviet Union abstained from voting on the document. They never approved the document. Certainly the free speech aspect is something that the Soviet Union was not comfortable with, but they said they didn't have enough say in it. Why is it important? Because it represents the first global expression of rights to which all human beings are entitled, are allowed to have. So this is the first time this many countries of the world, 50 countries of the world, got together to sign such a document to say that people all have inalienable rights that they should be able to have, such as freedom of speech. All right, we're good with this. I think we know what we have to do. Fill out your graphic organizer by hand, handwrite it out, sign your name on it, post it to the Google Classrooms, and then make sure you see the second assignment that I'm going to post too. Thanks for listening, and until next time, have a good one, y'all.